Introducing our 2024 HPD car. We're gonna grab Glenn Vitale, our VP of Ops and race car driver. He took this out at Sebring stock already. We've added some parts. We're gonna get his thoughts on S550 versus S650 and much more. Maybe you've seen this car on our social channels at Sebring, and that's because it ran an incredibly impressive time, 2 minutes and 30 seconds stock. But before we dive into the parts we've added and everything else, we'll just talk about the car itself. It's a 2024 GT with the performance package and the MT82 transmission. We actually preferred to have a base model, but this one ended up being a premium because it was the easiest one for us to get our hands on. But aside from that, if you're looking for the perfect HPD car and you want that stick shift transmission, which is something we prefer, 10 speeds, obviously no slouch in a straight line, and we've tested it on track in the Mach 1 as well, and it performed great. But again, if you're the kind of person who wants to row your own gears, the MT82 is definitely the way to go. And you definitely want to opt for the performance package if you are looking to take your car out on track. The reason for that, more than ever versus the S550 and anything before that, is the performance package. You get a ton of benefit for that package now, exclusively in the brakes. Not that the base brakes aren't good, but if you're looking to push the car to the limit and test the limit of that brake system out in a track setting or a high performance setting, the factory braking system on these S650s with the 6-piston up front and the 4-piston in the rear is some of the best I've ever felt in a Mustang, and Glenn agrees too. You'll hear more about it later. And in terms of the parts we've added, we did not add a ton. If you've seen the Silver Bullet videos already, you know we added a ton of parts to that car because we wanted to get it down the drag strip as quickly as possible, obviously on a stock tune. We had the same limitations here, but we wanted to put a package on it that made the most sense but didn't break the bank. So going down the list, in terms of the wheels, what you see first, this is the street setup, the 19x11 square with the Nitto NT555 G2s. It's a 305/35 square fitment. Obviously, if you run that 11-inch square, you need a spacer up front, and it's a 1-inch spacer. Everything's available on our website, and honestly, with the satin black against the white, the contrast looks killer. In addition to that, we also have our suspension underneath it. We pulled out the factory suspension and put our dual rate springs along with our adjustable Pro Action shocks, front and rear, as well as our Steeda camber plates up front to add a little bit additional camber, obviously for that better front end grip. And in the rear, you're looking at our Steeda Stop the Hop kit. We have our IRS subframe braces, as well as our bushing support system and the alignment kit in the rear. And last but certainly not least, our 2-point G-Track brace underneath to add some additional stability on the K-member under the car. And in terms of powertrain, obviously we can't tune these cars yet, so under the hood, it's still stock. But for the exhaust system, we did add our Steeda catback exhaust kit. This fits 15 to 17 GTs, as well as non-active 2024 cars. Sounds really good and has some great performance benefits as well. We have run a lot of 2024 Mustangs on the dyno, everything from GT manuals and automatics up to dark horses as well. This car made a lot of horsepower stock. I would say probably the highest horsepower GT that we have dynoed at our facility so far. Definitely gonna help out on track. So enough about the car. Let's get Glenn in the driver's seat and see his thoughts not only on the S650 Mustang, but also the parts we've added and maybe some predictions on what it's gonna run at the track next time it's out. So obviously you've driven the car at Sebring, you've driven the car. Make it right, make it right. Woo!
Brakes are working good. Still have the stock pads on this.
Yeah, so what's your favorite part about this car? You have plenty of seat time in the S550s, you have plenty of time in our number 20 road race car, obviously the red HPD car, which you literally drove up here for this visit. What's your favorite thing about the new 24s?
My favorite thing about the new 24s is just what Ford did with all the various modules. The stability control, the nannies that we used to have to deal with at the racetrack.
Right.
Used to be, you know, you'd have to disable everything.
Right.
But now it seems like with this new 24, it seems to be a lot better. It seems to not be as evasive as it used to be. Even in track mode with the S550, it would still kick in almost instantly.
For sure.
This car doesn't seem to be the case. You could still get them to kick in, but it seems like it takes a lot more work. You have to be a lot more out of shape for that to happen.
And I mean, let's talk about your stock time at Sebring. That was what?
See, like right now, it just kicked in. and it's kicking in again.
And it's allowing you to have some fun and
Oh,
kicking
yeah.
in just at the right time, right?
Yeah, I think for anyone who's not used to driving cars on the edge, it's perfect right now. Before with the S550, it would kick in really early and you really couldn't have much fun at all and you would just wear out your brakes.
For sure.
That part of it, I like what they did with that. The brakes on the Performance Pack car are killer. In all my years driving Mustangs, I've never had a Mustang where the stock brakes on a racetrack, especially down here in Florida, would last. I'd get maybe 4 laps, if that, before they start overheating. This car is amazing. We were able to do lap after lap after lap with no problems with the brakes.
And that's saying a lot coming from a track like Sebring. Sebring, like, people come from all over the country to torture test, and manufacturers come there to torture test their cars.
Right.
Like that is
Yes.
that is one of the main tracks that people torture test at.
Yes,
And if the brakes are lasting, bone stock,
exactly.
yeah.
That was the thing that I left with most coming from Sebring is I really thought I was going to have to worry about the brakes, and I didn't. You know, the other thing that comes to mind is I thought for sure I was going to have to deal with temperature issues.
Right.
Again, with all the previous Mustangs, we've always had at the racetrack temperature issues with cylinder head temperature, water temp, axle temp.
Yeah.
And now keep in mind, these are the GTs, so they don't have the diff cooler like the Dark Horse comes with, so axle temp is important. And sure enough, its car did have axle temp issues our first outing.
Right.
But again, it wasn't as bad as previous generation Mustangs. The axle temp didn't start to be an issue until the second session, halfway through the session. So that's very impressive to me that Ford was able to get this car to that point.
Just lap times alone. Lap times alone, 230 at Sebring is absolutely no slouch.
Yes.
I mean, you took our EcoBoost out, which has every single possible part of, in addition to that, a bunch of experimental parts, and it's a full bolt-on EcoBoost, and it's
Right.
making probably almost as much torque as this thing is. And it ran a 230 as well.
I was surprised. I mean, I remember the night before sitting with some friends, we were talking about it, what the lap times were going to be, and I was 2.5 seconds off. I thought I was going to be like a 232.5, 233. So I was pleasantly surprised when we got down to a 30 flat. That was amazing to me.
So the next question is, we've added all these parts. We're going to take it back out with all the parts added. No additional power with the exception of the exhaust for a little bit more sound and flow. But aside from that, what kind of times are we looking at? What do you think?
I'm going to be disappointed if we're not in the 28s. I'm hoping to pick up a good solid 2 seconds with what we just done.
I mean, the dual rates alone will be super substantial. Yep. The added camber, thanks to the camber plates up front, are going to be very helpful too. I wouldn't be surprised if you're better than that, honestly.
We'll see. I mean, the tires are still a limiting factor, but once you start getting more mechanical grip with the suspension,
right,
you start finding the shortcomings of the tires really quickly.
So okay, let's say you run a 228 or 227 with our suspension, which is a substantial improvement on a 2.5 minute lap. What's next for wheels and tires? We have our Tridents on here now, 19 by 11.
Right,
with,
so we'll be going back out with the stock wheels and tires just to keep an apples to apples comparison.
Of course.
But after this next trek outing that we're doing with the stock wheels and tires, when we come back, then we're going full on HPD style like we did with the Red 18. We'll go to our coilovers.
Okay.
We'll put on a set of dedicated track wheels and tires, and we'll go back out there with our coilovers and maybe even aero. I don't know. It's still early. We don't know yet, but maybe even some aero mods and see what we can do. See what we can get it down to.
And I'm willing to say, like, once you get tires in the car and the aero, and you really start gaining some speed, right? Not only in the straights, but in the corners.
Yep.
I'm willing to bet we're going to find the limit of the brake system.
Oh, we're definitely going to be upgrading the brake pads the third time we go there.
But even so, the stock brakes lasting that far and everything that we're doing, that's worlds better than what you would get out of a stock S550.
Yes, yeah. There's been a lot of hate out there about the 650s, and I don't understand why. I mean, yeah, it's similar to the 550, but just some of the things that we just mentioned earlier with these new modules that Ford put in these cars,
right,
they are without question, faster than a 550 on the track, bone stock. There's no argument there.
And in terms of other differences, a lot of people have mentioned the steering feel itself seems to be relatively similar to S550, but they did increase the ratio of the rack itself. So how did that feel out on track?
Yeah, so when we were out on the track, the steering did feel a little different than the 550. It took a little getting used to. I'm not sure exactly what Ford did or what they changed, but it's definitely a little different. I'm really interested to see, now that we got our springs, sway bars, and we've added more camber, how that steering feel is at the track. On the street, can't really feel that much difference. Yeah, it seems a little bit more firmer, but that's a lot because of the springs and sway bars. But on the track, the steering feel, the steering input, I expect to be different again now that we've added our springs and sway bars. I expect it to be a little bit more feedback, a little bit more telling as to your steering input versus what we had before.
Continually pushing the limit, and that's one of my favorite things about what we do with these cars and the parts, and taking them out on track and continually pushing that, turning the volume knob up to 11 and 12 and 13 and finding the limits, pushing things to break, and or find where they wear out and then make them better.
Just like I said, with these modest suspension modifications we just made, I think we're going to find the limits of the tires very quickly.
For sure.
And that's why another thing I'm looking for the third time we go to the track with, you know, a dedicated set of track tires, seeing what those limitations are for this car, because I think that's going to really transform this car.
One of the things in the previous S650 videos that we've put out there, we had a red S650 where we did Magnerite Sport Springs, sway bars, and did some testing before and after there. If you haven't seen that video, be sure to check it out. But there were a couple people that commented about the not so good, substituting words here, Pirelli tires. This is a new generation Pirelli tire on these GT Performance Package cars. Glenn's driven both the old generation and the new one. Glenn?
Yeah, there's light years better than the original P0s that were coming on the S550 Performance Packs way back in 2015, and I think even maybe 2016. And I've always been a big fan of the OE Michelin tires that they switched to. What was it, 16, 17, they went to the Michelins. I was always a big fan of those. These tires, I think, are way better than even those Michelins.
And that says a lot. Obviously, the base GT500 S550 as well as the base Mach 1 came with and some of the Performance Pack GTs came with those Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires. And a lot of those people swap out to them. Honestly, these are really good. They're on par, like you said, if not better.
Exactly. Definitely on par, maybe even better. There's no knocking these P0s.
And speaking of the street setup, I do want to talk about what we have on this car now. It's our Steeda Trident wheels, satin black finish. Obviously goes great with the white, that contrast. The Brembo brakes behind there. It's a 19x11 square, so it's our rear fitment all the way around, our HPDE fitment with a 1-inch spacer up front and 305/35 Nitto NT555 G2 square. So how do you think it looks? A. B, how do you think it drives?
The drive, the quality, you can't even tell the difference between stock and what we're doing right now. Just cruising along, it feels no different than OE. But the best part is when you really lay into it and you want to go around a corner, it's there. Like, you can feel the difference. It's a lot hard, it's a lot stiffer suspension. You can tell the body roll is gone. And it responds. It has so much better response now to steering than what we had before with the stock setup. It's a night and day difference.
Well, now that you've heard Glenn's thoughts in terms of S550 versus S650, his experience of having the S650 out on track at Sebring, running that 230, and ultimately getting these parts added and seeing where it falls, frankly, within the lineup behind me. We know that it was the same time as the Q350 EcoBoost behind me, a 230 at Sebring. Can the new S650 with no power modifications aside from that catback exhaust stand up to a tune, long tube headers, coilovers, everything else added to the HPDE car behind me, which ran a 224 around Sebring, or the number 20 road race car behind me, which ran a 220 around Sebring? If you want to know more about the number 20 road race car, we have a full video covering the ins and outs of it. But beside that, let us us know what you think on the 2024, what it's gonna run. Again, we can't tune these things. We are limited on power, but I am curious to see how it's gonna run, not only with the stock wheels and tires, with some additional camber and all of our suspension underneath, but once we do get some tires on it, see what the limitations of the factory braking system is, even though the S650 is much improved over the 550, and go from there. Hit that like, subscribe, the notification bell, and don't forget the most important thing, speed matters.